Here we go. We're back together again for another Foundation Series seminar. I appreciate you guys kind of hanging with us and kind of going through this, again, non-sexy stuff, but things that we really need to understand to catch fish. We've covered the 8 steps to catching more fish. We've covered the 5 P's of a successful fishing trip. We've covered pattern fishing in detail, kind of what to do on the water. And if you remember, a lot of those things talked about bait fish, whether it was our 8 steps and how important it is with the lure size, shape, color, action, how to match all that with the bait fish the fish are eating. We talked about bait fish when we talked about pattern fishing. That's important to kind of get keyed in on what kind of bait fish the fish are feeding on at a certain time of day. And we talked about bait fish. We did the 5 P's. We talked about preparation and planning, knowing what kind of bait fish were in the lake so you can kind of make a good plan. Well, today we're going to finally get to the bait fish piece of this, and we're going to talk about the most common bait fish that walleyes eat. Now, you know, obviously we teach walleye here, but this bait fish seminar, any of you guys here that fish for bass or pike or muskie or anything else, this is going to apply to you also because, as we've said multiple times before, you can't catch fish unless you're fishing where the fish are. And fish are the same way. They're not going to live in a place where there's no food. They're going to live where it's too deep, too shallow, maybe too warm, too cold. They're going to live in places that aren't perfect if that's where their food are. So understanding where the food is, how it moves throughout the year, and where you can get your chance to interact with them most commonly for walleye fishing, that's what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover lots of cool things about some different species of bait fish. Lots to learn, so pay attention, take some notes, and be ready to kind of get this stuff in your head when you're on the water. This was, the bait fish thing has obviously been around forever. This was a quote. There was a bait fish article in Fisherman magazine way back. And basically the subtitle was "Seek Ye First Forage to Find Walleye." I thought, yeah, pretty good little statement to put here. Again, walleyes, any kind of game fish, are going to be where their food is, even if it's out of depth, out of temp, out of their comfort range. If that's where the food is, that's where they're going to be. Find the food, you'll find the fish. You've heard us say this lots of times over the last couple weeks. Spend more time fishing where there's catchable fish. That's important, right? And other than during the spawning period, the major factor in game fish location is food. It's pretty simple, guys. Find the food, you'll find the fish. I can't make it any easier than that. Understand the kind of bait fish that live in your lake, where they're going to be today. Start fishing there, you'll catch a lot more fish. All right, so let's kind of start. And the way I laid this seminar out was kind of early spring through late fall. So we're kind of talking about the bait fish that become more prevalent, and every system isn't going to have all these bait fish. So that's the first thing you have to understand. And that goes back to that 5 P's part of the planning and preparation is what kind of bait fish live in my lake. So not every lake is going to have every single species of bait fish we're going to talk about. We're going to start from the early spring spawners and end up with the fall spawners. So that's kind of how I laid this out. So the first one we're going to talk about is smelt. Obviously not as common, numerous in the Great Lakes as they used to be, but still an important bait species a lot of places. Smelt will enter river systems around the same time walleyes are preparing to spawn. Smelt spawn about the same time that walleyes do. That's important. So as walleyes are moving into spawn, if you have a smelt population, the smelt are coming up the same rivers right before the walleyes are. So walleyes move in, they need some high protein food source. Nature provides it for them. Take advantage of the walleye smelt connection. Focus during the day on open water near the mouths of rivers and creeks. Everybody, I think, that grew up here in Michigan, that's my age or a little bit older, we all remember smelt dipping, right? Where you could put a scoop into the water and you'd take 4 people to hold a net full of smelt. We all remember that, right? So that's kind of where smelt do. They run up the rivers at night. They go back to the mouths of the rivers and creeks during the day to hang out, and that's where you can catch walleye. Smelt will stage during the day. They suspend in open water off the mouths of these creeks and rivers. And at night, the smelt make massive group runs into the shallows along the island, along rivers or along islands, rocky shorelines on islands to spawn. Walleyes take advantage of both of these. Smelt usually spawn in the spring, high 40, low 50, usually traditionally just before the walleyes do. Eggs hatch in about 2 or 3 weeks. And adults may spawn more than once in the spring. So you may get multiple smelt runs, especially if you have a cold spring that goes on for a long time. You may get multiple smelt runs into a river. They spawn in gravel bottom bays, flats, and rivers. You need gravel the same. Guys, when you look at this and you stop and you just step back and look for a minute, they're using the same exact strata that walleyes use to spawn, usually about a week or two earlier. That's why you see these pre-spawn movements to shallow gravel areas where fish are going to spawn, but they make these shallow movements to feed, walleyes do, because there's fish there for them to eat. Fish don't go any place that there isn't food. What does smelt eat? Smelt eat plankton, crustaceans, insect larvae, fish eggs, and fry. That becomes important in their location. Their habitat. They remain shallow in early spring until the water gets too warm. About 55 degrees, you'll see a definite shift from smelt to shallow water to deeper water. They have a tendency to school suspended in open water. Often for us, those walleye guys, once the water gets warm, surface temperatures in the mid-60s, they have a tendency, smelt do, to suspend below the thermocline. So a lot of walleyes won't go below that thermocline unless that's the only bait option. But sit time, we talk to you a little springtime or summertime pattern for smelt. Schools may move shallow at night to feed, especially during a heavy insect hatches. So if you have smelt in your lake, even in the summertime, as the bugs start to hatch, these smelt are going to come up above the thermocline, and the walleyes will take advantage of them. That's why you see a little flurry of activity just as you're getting to dusk. As the insects all start to hatch, the smelt start to rise to top, and you can see them on your sonar. They'll come above the thermocline. Walleyes will take advantage of that and feed at night. Sometimes smelt will even come all the way to the surface to feed on bugs if the water is cool enough. If you want to take advantage of smelt in the spring, shallow, hard bottom areas, especially around river mouths, bite seems to be better at night, closer to shore, better offshore during the day. So as these smelt are moving in, you can follow them during the course of the day. Out deeper water suspended during the day, and as the nighttime comes on or you're fishing early in the morning, start at the mouth of the rivers and then work your way out to deeper water. Summertime, they usually go quite deep, out of range of most walleye guys. They will suspend just below the thermocline and move up. Watch your sonar just above the thermocline in early evening, looking for areas. This is the one I talked about, summertime pattern to take advantage of smelt. Watch your sonar just above the thermocline in early evening, looking for areas where deep flats meet the top edge of the thermocline. So a lot of these lakes will have these long, deep, slow tapering flats, and at some point the thermocline is going to intersect that flat. Usually at night when those smelt come up, these walleyes will hang on these flats. When the smelt come up with the thermocline to eat the bugs, the walleyes will go on a feeding frenzy for about 25, 30, sometimes 45 minutes. Watch your sonar, find these flats where they intersect the thermocline. You can catch a lot of big fish in the summertime. They're taking care of smelt. And then in the fall, walleye and smelt move towards steep drop-offs near deep water. A movement back towards river mouths into deeper bays and natural lakes and reservoirs. So it's funny, these smelt really kind of show up in the same exact places we're catching walleyes early spring and late fall because they basically have the same movement. Also funny, you talk about nature taking care of itself, that those two times, early spring right before, right after spawn, and late fall getting ready for winter, high protein, easy to catch, soft boned forage is available for walleyes to gorge on and get their energy up. Smelt are a key factor if you have them in your system. Okay, how do we catch fish that are feeding on smelt? Long, slow wobbling crankbaits in spring and fall. Obviously silver or white based lures. I like greens, blues, purples, pinks. If you hold a smelt up, it has that kind of different colored, rainbow colored hue, but definitely white or silver based bodies. If you're going to spinner fish for walleyes that are chasing smelt in open water, large willow leaf blades, long skinny blades, size 5, size 6, all the way up to size 8. Again, silver, green, blue, purple, pink. And then I like the bigger Warrior flutter spoons, the big 3 3/8 inch long spoon. Looks more like a smelt, long, skinny. And again, silver base, green, blue, purple, pink is going to get you bites when fish are feeding on smelt. Okay, so that's kind of our first bait fish that walleyes take advantage of as they move into the rivers to spawn. After walleyes are done, remember we talked about when we were in the 8 steps, we talked about warm water early in the spring or in springtime. And warm water, not just being shallow water, but also being at the top part of the water column. But here we're talking about the warmest water in the lake being in shallow, soft bottom, soft bottom, dark bottom bays. You see this a lot in natural lakes, especially where walleyes live in the weeds, and a lot of places where walleyes have been planted. You'll see a movement that right after they're done spawning, they come out into the main lake, and one of their main forages, and I didn't understand this until I started doing some research, becomes brown bullheads. About around the time that walleye finish spawning, bullheads start to spawn in the marshes and other fertile areas near open water. So we've got these little bays, rivers, these creeks come in where walleyes are going to spawn, maybe a little bit of current, maybe a little bit of shallow gravel. All of a sudden these fish move off of there. They need to eat, they need to recover. If you're in a natural lake, usually traditionally natural lakes, some reservoirs up here in the north, but soft, dark bottom bays, the brown bullheads go in to spawn. Perfect for the walleyes. The water is warm, lots of bait. Walleyes don't need to go very far to start to eat and recover. Look for neck down areas where the main lake is attached to shallow, fertile, soft bottom areas. Very common forage in eutrophic lakes, again, older lakes where walleyes usually spawn, especially, again, with those stocked walleye populations. Brown bullheads spawn in the spring, mid-40s, mid-50s, peak around 52 to 54. Again, right after the walleyes are done spawning. Here's this great food source. They spawn in shallow, fertile back bays with soft bottom areas. Males will fan out a little saucer-shaped nest in the mud. You can actually see them if you look hard enough. Brown bullhead eat insect larvae, crustacean, leeches, snails, fish eggs, basically anything they can get their lips around. They will eat. They like shallow, fertile, warm parts of the lake. Preferred temperatures in the mid to high 50s. Schools feed at bottom and become more active at night. We've talked about finding bait fish, even if the water is too warm or too cold for walleyes. Great example in shallow natural lakes, especially with weeds. You'll catch a lot of fish in shallow. You go, why are these fish in this nasty, soft bottom in the summertime? That's why. There's food there. Okay, so understand where the food is. Spring patterns, as walleyes finish spawning, bullheads are spawning or just leaving. Walleyes will seek warmer water to feed, often in the shallow, dark bottom, fertile bays where the bullheads are. Perfect. Try fishing dark-colored jigs and bodies, dark crankbaits, or small dark-colored spinnerbaits. Slip bobbers with leeches, another great way to catch them. In summertime, large schools of bullheads will roam in shallow water and shallow reeds, especially around the weed edge. You can see these great big giant black blobs moving through the water. Those are usually bullheads. They like soft bottom areas close to weeds and weed edges. And again, dark-colored lures. Fall patterns, this is something you need to really pay attention to. Bullhead move back to their spring areas, and the spring patterns start to emerge. So they go back in the fall to these bays. But understand this, bullheads will go dormant most of the winter. But walleyes will move into these shallow, fertile, soft bays and actually root out these bullheads in the winter. So I've caught walleyes in shallow water in the wintertime, ice fishing, and you bring them up and their front of their lip is just all red and raw and nasty sometimes even. Well, what they've been doing, now that you start to do a little research, they've actually been in the mud rooting these bullheads that are just kind of hanging in the mud, just kind of halfway dormant. The walleyes are actually, they're rooting them out, digging them out, and the bottom of their chin gets all red and raw. Never knew why that happened at certain times of the year. This is why, because all the fish that had that were caught in shallow water close to soft bottom bays. It's funny how when you know the information, things start to come together. Again, dark colored jigs and bodies. A lot of times I'll put a half crawler on there just for a little bit of smell. I like leeches and slip bobbers, smaller crankbaits. CD5 walleye divers are a great imitator of brown bullheads, a little small number 5 shad wraps. One of my favorites, if I'm fishing this type of area, I like these little rebel crawfish. If you're a crankbait guy, you've got some of these little rebel crawfish. They're deep diving. They come in green. They look just like a crawfish, come in greens and oranges and reds and dark browns. Have a couple of those because the way the action moves, they look just like bullhead. If you are going to do some little bit of spinner fishing, and this would be on-weighted spinners usually, or small little 1/4 ounce or 1/2 ounce inline weights, small blades, right? Smaller Colorado blades, gold or copper work. Again, dark colored smile blades, anything with copper or gold seems to work. And you don't catch a lot of bullhead eating fish on spoons because bullheads tend to be towards the bottom. But if you are going to target them, I'd use the smaller spoon in gold or copper base. Okay, so we've got smelt in the rivers, we're spawning. We're done spawning, we're going to move out. We need a place to eat. We're in a natural lake, let's say now. I've got these really, really warm water, these shallow, fertile bays, bullheads are there. I'm a walleye, I can get fat and happy. Okay, next bait fish we're going to talk about is probably a bait fish that no matter where you fish for walleyes, actually swims in the body of water you're fishing. Walleyes and perch kind of go together like peanut butter and jelly. So it's important that you understand what perch do, where they go, and where walleyes really start to interact. Walleyes will eat perch throughout the year, but they take advantage of perch during their spawn. When the perch, listen again, when the perch gather in weedy bays and brushy shorelines, usually a couple weeks after the walleye spawn and the temperature gets into the mid to high 50s. I'm a walleye, I'm starving, I'm done spawning, I come out of shallow gravel, I come out of creeks, I come out of rivers, I go into these shallow fertile bays right next to them, I got some bullheads, all of a sudden the bullheads start to disappear, I move out to the first weed edge, guess what shows up? All my perch are there for me to have another meal. It's walleye buffet again, okay? After spawning, perch will move to mid-depth flats or hold along breaks. Walleyes will move towards deeper contours while the perch feed in the shallows during the day. Now, here's what you have to understand about perch. As dusk falls, walleye will move up to feed on perch who have extremely poor vision at dusk and night. As a general rule, a shallow bite will dominate the spring and fall, deeper during the winter and summer. A lot of us that grew up walleye fishing were taught that you had to be out early in the morning or stay out evening into the early night. Okay? A lot of that was because whoever taught us walleye fishing did a lot of it in natural lakes around the weeds where there were perch. What happens is, because of the way a walleye's eye is built, the way their eye collects light, they have a little coating on the back called tapetum lucidum. The way it gathers light, it makes walleyes gives walleyes really good eyesight at night, especially in conditions where the light is changing from a lot of light to little light in the afternoon or no light to a little bit of light in the morning. Walleyes can see very well. Perch are basically blind, especially at times when the light is changing. So that time in the morning where the sun isn't up, but you got a little bit of light and the sun starts to come up, perch are particularly almost blind. That same time in the afternoon, right? Sun goes down, you still got light, and then it starts to get dark. Perch are basically blind. That's when the best walleye fishing always was, in shallow water. It wasn't because walleyes needed that type of condition to feed, or walleyes couldn't see, or walleyes wanted to see at night. It had nothing to do with the walleye. It has to do that the perch that live in that shallow water cover, they can't see. They're basically blind. It's pretty easy for a walleye to catch a blind baitfish. So that's why you see this movement in shallow water of game fish. It seems to be 45 minutes in the morning, 45 minutes in the afternoon, where it's really, really good. And why sometimes during low light conditions during the day, the shallow bite is good, has to do with the perch can't see when there's not a lot of light, especially when there's not a lot of light changing. So understanding how your baitfish actually live and what they have to do can actually help you catch more walleyes. All right, you usually spawn upper 50 degrees, eggs hatch 2 to 3 weeks. Most perch don't start spawning until they're about 5 or 6 inches long. So it takes a couple of years for a perch to become sexually mature. But the smaller fish, the smaller perch, will inhabit the shallow spawning areas along with the bigger perch. Aha! I don't want to maybe take all the time to catch a big perch. It's a little bit smarter. I've got a whole bunch of little perch to eat if I'm a walleye trying to recover. Weedy bays, weedy bars, brush-covered shoreline is where perch will lay their eggs. So look for cover. Perch eat plankton, crustaceans, insect larvae, fish eggs, fry. We know they eat minnows. Habitat. Yellow perch will stay shallow after the spawn. Then they move to mid-depth flats or breaks. Now here's what's important about perch, especially early in the spring. Young of the year will remain shallow and find cover in weeds and brush. This is why all summer there's good walleye fishing in shallow weeds. Even when the water is hot, the sun is up, the water's clear, the water's too warm for walleyes. If you have a good perch population, you're going to have young of the year perch still in the weeds all summer. Walleyes are going to stay there and just gorge on them. Juvenile adult perch will have a tendency to relate to structure, often on the bottom in large schools. Okay? So we've got all the perch come shallow to spawn. And then once that's done, the bigger fish have a tendency to move deeper onto deeper breaks or deeper flats. But the smaller 3, 4, 5 inch perch have a tendency to stay inside the weeds. So we can catch walleye that are feeding on perch on the bottom, mid-depth flats, or we can catch them in shallow cover, be it woods or weeds or rocks, whatever it is. We can catch them in shallow cover all summer long. So perch, if you have perch in your lake, and most walleye lakes have perch, is an absolutely awesome food fish to understand how it moves and where you can catch walleyes. All right, spring patterns, shallow hard bottom areas with weed and a brush cover, that's where they spawn. They'll use hard spots on sandy bottoms if you don't have a lot of cover. Deep weed edges are awesome, shallow flats with hard bottom, shoreline connected humps, secondary points. Perch are basically a smaller cousin of the walleye. So any place you've caught a walleye, kind of think that's how perch are going to move too. Summer patterns, young of the year will favor shallow cover for protection, but we can catch a lot of walleyes in the weeds. Some adults will use shallow cover, but usually deeper flats, deep clumps of coontail weed, and bottoms with sandgrass. That little chara, that sandgrass kind of grows like a mat on the bottom. If you have that in 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 feet of water, perch are going to use that. Walleyes will use that also. Stay tuned for our weed walleye seminar. That's when you're going to want to come to. We're going to talk about how to take advantage of that. In the fall time, perch return to shallow bottom areas on sand flats, remaining green weed growth, and the backs of bays. So again, we see this Springtime, shallow movement. Perch have a tendency to live deep water lifestyle in summer, then they move back shallow again in the fall. It's amazing how that happens to be exactly where we catch walleyes in the types of lakes that perch are abundant in. Funny how that happens. Okay, perch-shaped crankbaits excel in shallow and open water. Shad-style crankbaits that are 3, 4, 5 inches long. Natural perch and fire tiger are favorites. I'm going to spend just 2 seconds. We spent a lot of time in the Crankbait Crazy DVD talking about colors. I'm not a big fan of natural colored crankbaits, especially in cover. Perch are colored that way, so when they get in the weeds, they can disappear and hide. You don't want your lure to disappear. I have a tendency to fish a lot more fire tiger than I do natural perch. It has the same thing. Greenback, yellow chartreuse side, orange belly. Looks like a perch, but the colors stand out more than a natural perch, which kind of fades in. I'm not a big fan of natural colored crankbaits. Fish are colored that way so they can hide. I don't want my bait to hide, but fire tiger is definitely one of my favorites. Flicker shads are great. I like jointed rapalas, number 9, number 11, number 13 jointed rapalas are some of my favorites. Or you can fish a jig with a 3 or 5 inch plastic body. Great way to fish the weeds. Pitch a jig in there and a 1/2 ounce, 3/4 ounce jig head and kind of snap it through the weeds with about a 4 or 5 inch body. Catch a lot of fish. Most guys take advantage of the perch thing in deep water by running crawler harnesses on usually heavy snap weights or on bottom bouncers, because perch in deep water are going to live on the bottom. They're not going to be suspended. And I like size 4, size 6, either Colorado or Indiana blades, gold base, green, orange, chartreuse, something that looks like a perch. But definitely you want a gold blade when you do this. Because perch don't suspend, the spoon bite isn't always great for perch. But again, you can get spoons with a gold base and colors that look like perch if you want to fish spoons close to the bottom. My favorite way to catch fish is close to the weeds, on the outside edge of the weeds, either casting or trolling perch-style crankbaits or trolling bottom bouncers with spinners close to the bottom. Okay? All right, so we're kind of done with spring now. So we've got walleyes in the weeds kind of eating on some perch. We're kind of moving into late spring, early summer, late May, June in our part of the world up here. And this is a bite. I learned how to walleye fish. How many of you guys learned to walleye fish in open water? Okay, most of you. Most of you guys were trollers from the start. I was not a troller from the start. I learned how to catch walleyes in a lake called Lake Nipissing in Lapeer. Maximum depth, 23 feet, 24 feet, whatever it was. 400 acres, planted, stocked walleye, tons of weed growth. Fantastic largemouth bass lake, great crappie lake. Used to be a lot of pike in the lake. They put walleyes in there and the walleye population just exploded. That's where I basically learned to fish, period, how to lake fish. But it's definitely where I learned how to walleye fish. So my walleye fishing experience and where I started my foundation is different than the guys who learned either in Detroit River, Saginaw River, St. Clair River, or in the open water. I learned on a shallow, weedy, natural lake. And one of the patterns that I learned as a bass fisherman, but was able to apply to my walleye fishing that very, very few people take advantage of, even bass fishermen, was the bluegill crappie. Okay, these lakes are full of little bluegills and little crappies. Late May and early June, these young of the year crappies, bluegills, sometimes bullheads, they'll suspend in large schools over open water right off of the deep weed edge. Okay? You'll see them. Sometimes they'll be busting bugs. You'll see all these little ripples on the surface, busting bugs. That's a school of bluegills, school of crappies. They're usually smaller ones, but they're up there busting bugs. Or right below that school of crappies and bluegills or bullheads busting bugs is game fish. Maybe bass, maybe walleye, maybe both. You never know. But take advantage of this situation. It's an awesome situation. Bluegills and crappies spawn all year, but their peak is in the mid-70s in late spring. Sand or gravel areas in shallow water, usually 4 to 10 feet. The males will fan out of the nest just like their bigger cousin largemouth bass do. They'll eat insects, leeches, algae, zooplankton, small fish, anything, right? They like quiet, weedy waters with food and cover. Here's what's important. Smaller panfish stay shallow all year, while larger adults move to deeper water after spawning. Talk to somebody who catches a lot of big bluegills in the summertime. They're not fishing shallow water. They're not fishing weeds. They're fishing deep water suspended fish. But for our point of view right here, as bait fish, we want the smaller bluegills, smaller crappies. Sight feeder, like the perch, they have poor vision in low light or changing light conditions. So again, we have the ability to take advantage of them. Now, one of the things we talked about in, let me think here. In the 5 Ps One of the things we talked about in that seminar, in the planning part or the preparation part, was finding out how deep the deep weed edge in a lake grows. Okay, because that's an edge. That's a limit of sunlight penetration. That depth is important, and we talked about why that depth is a little bit about that being important. Guys, I'm going to tell you why it's absolutely critical. Because if that weed edge stops at 12 feet, that's where the weeds stop growing. You come off that deep weed edge out into 20, 25 feet of water like I have at Lake Nepsine. These bluegills and crappies, when they move off that deep weed edge, guess how deep they are? They're at the same exact depth as where the weeds stop growing. They use that sunlight penetration edge over 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 feet of water. They use that edge of sunlight penetration as their edge when they suspend over deeper water. That's why it's absolutely critical to know how deep the weeds stop growing before you go to a body of water. That's where you know where to start looking for suspended bait fish in the summertime. Okay? So spring patterns, walleyes live in shallow weed growth. They'll eat juvenile and young of the year panfish all year, but especially in the spring. Summer patterns, juvenile and young of the year panfish are used by walleyes that spend the summer in shallow weeds. So they will eat young of the year in the weeds, and they'll also move off the deep weed edge to take advantage of the large schools of panfish that suspend just off the deep weed edge. Again, often at the depth of the deepest weed growth. And walleyes will live out there with them, and they'll take advantage of them. Fall patterns, as the weed beds die and cover becomes scarce, panfish become very vulnerable to walleyes in shallow flats, especially on these natural lakes. Look for flats that had heavy summer weed growth. As that weed growth starts to die in the fall, you're going to see a lot of panfish in very, very confined areas, which means there's going to be walleyes roaming those flats looking for those restaurants where all the food is. Okay? Crankbaits are a great way to catch walleye in the weeds or on weed edges. Again, our Weed Walleye DVD covers all this. Fish smaller, fatter crankbaits, 200 series Rip Shad, number 5, number 7 Shad Rap, number 4 Glass Shad Rap, the smaller number 4, number 5, number 7 Flicker Shads, those little baits that are 2 to 4 inches long. One of my favorite ways to catch walleyes in the weeds, either in the weeds or just outside the weeds, jig spinners like the beetle spin. Great way to cast, great way to troll, get a little bit of flash and vibration from the spinner. You got a body down there, you can fish it through the weeds. It's kind of a small spinner bait, it's kind of weedless. One of my favorite ways to fish for these fish. Jigs with plastic shad bodies if you want to fish closer to the bottom. And then don't forget one of my favorite ways to get fish, walleyes out of the weeds, live bait like leeches under slip bobbers. Again, we cover that in our Weed Walleye DVD. If you're going to troll the outside weed edges in the summertime for walleyes that are taking advantage of these suspended schools, smaller Colorado blades, number 3, number 4, silver or gold work well. I like orange chartreuse if I'm going to be imitating bluegills, and black, blue, and green accents if I'm going to be imitating crappies. Smile blades are one of my favorites if I'm going to fish in the weed edges. And then, you know what? You can get a spoon bite because these fish move far enough from the weeds. You can run offshore and line planer boards. You can actually do open water trolling close to the weed edges. And I will run the small little warrior spoon out there, the little 2.5-inch spoon. I will run that little warrior spoon out there because that's a perfect imitation of a small crappie or a small bluegill. Again, mostly silver and gold, orange chartreuse if I'm imitating a bluegill, and then black, blue, green accents if I'm imitating a crappie. Guys, if you fish natural lakes, for walleyes, and you start to see these schools of bait, you go, man, why is that out in 40 feet of water right on the surface? Just off the deep weed edge, I guarantee you this is what's happening. You need to get over there. Stop worrying about catching the bluegills or the crappies. Catch the game fish that are underneath there, okay? Take advantage of that. All right, let's talk about probably one of the most famous or infamous or popular bait fish for walleyes, and we're going to talk about minnows or shiners kind of as a group. Two basic type of shiners are most popular here in Michigan, emerald shiner and the spot tail. We'll talk about those. But we're going to group them into a group called minnows. Most minnows spawn right around the time that the perch are spawning. Right after the walleye has spawned, you'll see a spawning movement of shiners. Here's what's important to understand. Studies on Lake Erie show walleyes will focus on emerald and spot tail shiners in May and June. Okay? Walleye between 22 and 26 inches in Lake Erie during the spring and fall will focus on emeralds and spot tail. So there's a distinct focus of fish in open water. This is a Lake Erie study, but I tell you, it's exactly the same on Saginaw Bay. That these studies tell us that most of the time, walleyes, especially those in the 4 to 8 pound range, are feeding on emerald shiners or spot tail shiners almost all year long. Important to understand how shiners work. Shiners spawn late spring, right around 70 degrees. It's one of the latest spawning minnow species. So again, look at, guys, we're into 70 degrees, and they're going to spawn. They're a nighttime broadcast spawner that fertilizes their eggs near the surface over shallow sand and gravel bottoms. Okay? Shallow sand and gravel. It's 70 degrees, guys, and we still have bait fish that are living and spawning in shallow water. You don't need to go out to deep water right away to catch walleyes. There's a ton of walleyes, guys, in 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 feet of water all year long. They're easier to catch in shallow water. It's easier to fish in shallow water. Just take advantage of these walleyes that are living in shallow water all year. You don't need to go out deep right away. Emerald shiners feed on plankton, insects, and algae. We'll talk about that in a second. They usually live near the surface of open water. May be found in deeper bays, but they tend to stay offshore. Once they're done spawning, they have a tendency to kind of head out to open water because they're plankton and algae feeders. That's why they're out there. Here's an important note to think about when you're fishing for shiners, or fishing for walleyes that are eating shiners. Shiners will move up and down the water column reacting to light levels and light penetration, right? Although emerald shiners reach a maximum length of about 4 inches, large walleyes love them, especially spring into early summer, late summer into fall. Okay, studies show that shiners are the largest portion of a Lake Erie walleye diet in May and June. They're easy to get to. They're on shallow flats. They're just off those shallow flats. That's where the walleyes are. They're easy to get to. All right, spring patterns. During spawning, emerald shiners will be in huge schools of up to 1 million fish. If you've ever fished the St. Clair River, Detroit River, in late spring, you can see these shiners, especially on very steep drop-offs. Break walls are a great place to see this on the river. You will see literally a school of shiners go by that takes 5 minutes to go by. And it's just top to bottom shiners, and they just keep on swimming by. Big, giant, massive schools of emerald shiners. Look for shallow sand and gravel flats, especially near river mouths, or any place that you've got rocky shoreline that has current or access to wind. And you can catch fish all day and all night in the springtime because they are broadcast spawners at night. Cast minnow baits and jigs with 3 to 4 inch tails in the springtime, or you can troll open water close to the spawning areas with cranks, spoons, and spinners. Another great way to catch them. Summertime, though, everything changes. Open water trolling is how you take advantage of walleyes that are eating emerald shiners. Adjust your depth of your lure to key in on the depth of the emerald shiners. Very rarely are shiners deeper than 20 feet. Most of the time, they're shallower than 15 feet, okay? Look for open water near main lake structure, and you can fish cranks, spoons, and spinners, depending on what you want to fish. But understand that they spend most of their time in the top part of the water column. Why is that? Because remember, they eat plankton, insects, and algae. Well, plankton is a surface plant. Insects come up to eat the plankton, right? And then algae kind of gathers at the top of the water column. So these fish aren't going to go very far from their food, just like walleyes aren't going to go far from their food. Emerald shiners' food is at the surface. That's where they're going to live, okay? Fall patterns, shiners remain in open water and move closer to main lake points, flats, and humps. So they live an open water lifestyle all summer. As the fall comes and it gets a little cooler, they'll start to move still in open water, but kind of closer to points, closer to bays, closer to creeks that come in. Strong movement toward drowned river mouths and harbors. Trolling large, thin crankbaits catches fall walleye, getting fat on shiners. Think about what we just talked about, right? So shallow water in late spring, around sand flats, okay? Catch a lot of walleye there. Summer patterns, open water trolling, usually shallower than 15 feet, sometimes over 30, 40, 50, 60 feet of water. Catch a lot of walleyes doing that. And then fall, a strong movement toward drowned river mouths and harbors. Where do we catch most of our fall walleye, especially as we get late in the fall? Close to the mouth of the Saginaw River, down here in Ohio, where there's 3 rivers basically dumping in. At the mouth of the bottom of the Detroit River, there at Fermi and Sterling State Park. Guys, those walleyes are there for a reason, and the reason is 100% food. Understand the food, understand how it moves. I guarantee you're going to catch a lot more fish. All right, trolling for emerald shiners, minnow baits, silver baits are great. Rapalas 7 to 13, long skinnier baits, deep husky jerks, deep junior thunder sticks. I like longer skinnier baits. CD5 walleye divers. We'll go bigger baits in the fall, big ripsticks, reef runners, all the way up to the 18, the big number size 11, tail dancers. And I like lures with pink, purple, blue, green. Seem to kind of work because, again, shiners have that hue. Blades, if I'm going to fish shiners open water, I'm going to troll. Remember, they don't get much bigger than 4 inches. So I stay with smaller blades, size 4, size 5, size 6. Usually willow leaf blades, long, skinny blades. We get that same flash that the Baitfish gives. I fish a lot of silver, green, blue, purple, pink, basic colors. And then if I'm going to get out there and I'm going to troll, which I do a lot of spoon trolling when the walleyes get suspended, I like the Warrior Flutter Spoon, the 3 3/8. Silver base, green, blue, purple, pink, kind of mix and match. But I like the little bit longer spoon because it imitates those long, thin Baitfish a whole lot better. Okay? All right, let's talk about this real fast. We talked about shiners kind of being 2 different types, especially here in Michigan, spot tail and emerald. Very, very easy to tell the difference. Spot tails, guess what? Have a spot on their tail. Pretty easy to figure out. They're very, very distinct, very, very easy to see. They have a big black spot at the fork of their tail, base of their tail. They have a tendency to be a little more brown, a little more tan. They're not quite as shiny and silvery. They have a distinct spot. The biggest, easiest way to tell is their mouth is kind of downturned. Okay? Their mouth is kind of, the top lip is kind of turned down and kind of an overbite. That's a spot tail. Great choice on Erie and St. Clair. When I get minnows on the Detroit River, first thing I do is take all the spot tails and I throw them away. Because if you're fishing a spot tail on the Detroit River, you might as well be fishing with nothing. If you're using, I don't use a lot of live bait anymore, but when I did, I would sort the first thing I would do, I'd get 8-10 dozen minnows in the morning. I'd sort the spot tails out. Maybe not throw them out, but I put them in a different bucket so I didn't use them until I absolutely had to. Your catch success rate on Detroit River will go down exponentially fishing spot tails as opposed to fishing emeralds. But on Erie and St. Clair, spot tails are dynamite. Emerald shiners, again, no spot on the tail. The easiest way to tell a spot tail or an emerald from a spot tail is their mouth is turned up. I call it a tarpon mouth. Their bottom lip kind of comes up at an angle, whereas the spot tail has a turned down mouth and the spot. They're very, very easy to tell apart. Emeralds are much more shiny, much more silver, have a lot more flash. No spot on the tail and no upturned mouth. Best choice on the Detroit River. Okay? So just a little difference. Minnows aren't all created the same, right? So even shiners, the spot tails versus the emeralds are different, and you need to concentrate on what you're fishing in different areas. Okay, let's kind of keep moving into the summer period here. Gizzard shad will spawn late spring, early summer, 1 to 10 feet of water, mid-60s to mid-70 degrees. Shad will normally stay in water less than 30 feet, and they will return to deep water as soon as the spawn is over. They come in shallow, they spawn close to shore a lot of times. As soon as they're done, they go back out to open water. Gizzard shad do not like to be confined. They like open water. Shad are a major source of walleye, food for walleye in Lake Erie, Saginaw Bay, any place that they swim. Walleyes will take advantage of shad as they suspend in the water column and moved up to eat the plankton on the surface. It is the major food source for most game species in reservoirs, north or south. Gizzard shad are a huge part of the food chain in man-made lakes. Again, they spawn late spring, 63, 70 degrees, mid-60s, mid-70s. They're a nighttime spawner. Again, nighttime broadcast spawner that fertilizes eggs near the surface over shallow sand and gravel flats. They love sunken timber. If you can find a sand flat in 6, 7, 8, 9 feet of water and it's got old submerged timber, awesome. I fish a little reservoir up here called Holly Reservoir. Some of you guys, right, know where Holly Reservoir is. One of the best spawn areas is that bay just on the west side of Goose Point, basically from Goose Point to not quite to the boat ramp, that bay. That bay, if you look at your sonar, especially your down scan and side scan, that bay is littered with all the old trees they cut down. That used to be a forest. If you look at the shore, you can see what it used to look like underneath the water. All that wood and that timber is there. It's an awesome walleye spot in May and June. Why is it an awesome walleye spot in May and June? That's where all the shad go to spawn. Okay? So it's very, very easy to kind of see how where gizzard shad have to be to spawn creates a situation where walleyes are in a certain spot, certain time of year. It's not because the walleyes want to be there, it's because their food is there. Again, they eat plankton, algae. They're usually near the surface of open water. They may be found a little bit deeper, but they definitely like to be offshore. They like to be in open water once they're done spawning. Very sensitive to low oxygen. We see gizzard shad die-offs on Saginaw Bay. We see it on Lake St. Clair. We see it on Lake Erie. They see it in the reservoirs down south. Sometimes we'll see it here if we get a bad winter in our reservoirs. We'll see a lot of dead gizzard shad. That's because they really have a problem with low oxygen. They can live in water temperatures in the high 90-degree range, but they need oxygen. here's where it's important to understand for walleyes, guys. Huge schools will form under plankton beds in warm, calm conditions, and wind can blow plankton, shad will follow. Okay, let's talk about this for a second before I get into presentations. It's hot. It's summertime. It's June, July, August. It's 90 degrees outside. Surface temperature's been 77, 78 degrees for 3 weeks now. It's 5 days of flat calm. Sun is shining every day. Not a breath of wind. You're going fishing. The book tells you that walleyes are going to be in deep water, cold water, somewhere they can hide. They're going to be close to the bottom. You need to go slow. If you have gizzard shad, alewives, or shiners in your body of water, you're never going to catch any fish doing that. Because when that happens, hot, flat, calm, consistently hot weather, all the plankton comes to the surface. Big giant mats. All the plankton feeders, gizzard shad, emerald shiners, alewives, move to the surface to feed. All your walleyes are 4, 5, 6, 7 feet down, and they're eating bait fish that move very fast. Gizzard shads swim very fast, very erratic. You're fishing 0 miles an hour on the bottom, and all the walleyes are 7 feet, 8 feet deep, over 30, 40 feet of water, and they're going 4.5 miles an hour. Okay? If you have gizzard shad, emerald shiners, or alewives in your system, ignore the book. Throw the book away. Hot, flat, calm, sunny. Get to the top and start going fast. It's one of my favorite times to fish on Saginaw Bay. You can catch fish at 3, 3.5, 3.7 miles an hour. Cover a lot of water, and you're only fishing baits 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 feet down. It might be over 40 feet of water, but all the fish are up at the surface. Understand what your bait fish do. You're going to catch a lot more fish. Okay, spring patterns during spawning. Fish in shallow water near gravel shorelines, flats, and timbered. I like to do a lot of casting and trolling because those fish will move in schools. Summer patterns, open water trolling. Adjust your depth to key in on where the shad schools are. Fall patterns, shad remain in open water. And here's an important little tip here. When you've got a lake that has gizzard shad, especially when you get those hot, flat conditions we just talked about, you're going to have 2 depths or 2 areas, kill zones, where walleyes are going to be caught. One is going to be directly below the school of gizzard shad. So they're up on the surface, they're feeding. Walleyes are right below that. The other one's going to be down about 15 feet below that. And that's where the walleyes will sit and rest before they come up and bust the shad. So they'll sit down, say the shad up at the surface. We've got walleyes at 6, 7, 8 feet feeding. You'll have walleyes down at 20, 21 feet, and they're resting. You'll see them on your sonar. They're tough to catch because they are either just coming back from feeding or just getting ready. You can catch a few there, but your highest percentage is going to be up at the top. So I always keep 1, maybe 2 baits depending on my rides I have down at those lower, trying to get the fish that are coming up to feed. But I have most of my baits up in the top part of the water column, taking advantage of the fish that currently are feeding. Okay? Minnow baits, silver baits are great. Shiner imitators. I like more white-based baits than I do silver, to be honest with you. 7 to 13 Rapalas, deep husky jerks, deep junior thundersticks, wally divers, flicker shads, shad wraps, any of those baits. In the summertime, I love fast-moving baits, right? Hot and tots, rattle tots, baits that have a very, very, really erratic action, look like a shad moving through the water. Rip shads, flicker shads, those types of baits. In the fall, I'll go to bigger baits, big reef runners, big tail dancers, that type of thing. Colorado blades, if you're going to troll, silver or white base, green, blue, purple, pink. White blades with dots are one of my favorites. Mike makes that. Mike at Warrior makes the Wonder Bread, and we do a different version of it. We call it Sweet Pea. It's basically a white blade with a little bit of blue, a little chartreuse pink dots. One of my favorite gizzard shad imitators. And then spoons, I like the bigger flutter spoons. Again, white base usually, green, blue, purple, pink. Again, white with dots is my favorite. Don't be afraid to troll fast. 3, sometimes faster than 3 miles an hour. You're going to catch some fish. Okay? All right, let's talk a little bit about alewives real quick. Alewives are kind of one of those bait fish that we've had here. They're invasive species. We've had them here. They've been here. Then they disappeared. They're kind of here. They're kind of not here. It depends on the years. Alewives are kind of a curse and a blessing. They make walleyes grow fat really fast, but they also eat a lot of walleye eggs. So it's kind of a catch-22 if you have them. They spawn right around 58, 64 degrees. They stay shallow most of the time. They will suspend. They have a tendency, or gizzard shad have a tendency to suspend out in open water. Alewives have a tendency to suspend over open water, but close to structure. They're much more point oriented than gizzard shad are. They'll spawn shallow water, gravel or sand, shallow vegetation. Again, they eat zooplankton and algae, so they're going to be up towards the surface. They like open water away from structure, but they will move towards points and structure, deep water structure, a lot more than gizzard shad will. Same basic things as you're trying to do with the gizzard shad. Spawning alewives show up in shallow areas just as the adult walleye is starting to think about heading to open water. So at some point in the summertime, when the alewives come and start to spawn, you're going to see a situation where some of the walleyes head deep and start chasing shiners and shad. Some of the walleyes will actually stay shallow and take advantage of the alewives that are just coming to spawn. So it's kind of a catch-22. Rattle baits, spinner baits, shad-shaped crankbaits in shallow, hard-bottom areas. You want to cover a lot of water because alewives, even when they're spawning, move very fast and very erratic. Rattle baits, spinner baits, shad-style crankbaits, baits you can move fast. Summer patterns, open water fish. Alewives tend to suspend over flats up to 80 feet. Sometimes it seems like walleyes, you just can't catch them. Well, when that happens, they're usually way out over deep water chasing big schools of alewives. And then in the fall, alewives remain in open water, but they start to come back to steep, dropping shoreline connected points. The exact same kind of areas that we fish in the fall and catch a lot of walleye. Again, walleyes aren't there because they want to be there. Walleyes are there because their bait fish are there. So pay attention if you have alewives in your lake. You can kind of, alewives and gizzard shad are about the same. Gizzard shad have a tendency to stay in open water. Alewives will stay in open water closer to structure, or they will go way out deep. Gizzard shad kind of stay in that mid-depth range. But if you have alewives, make sure you're taking advantage of the times you can catch them. Same type of things. Minnow and shad imitating crankbaits, spring and fall. I like bigger baits. The same thing we talked about. Rip shads, rattle tots, hottentots, baits that move erratic and have an erratic action. Same thing with blades, right? Big Colorado blades, 5, 6, 8, all the way up to that. The bigger spoons. And here's important though. Remember we talked about gizzard shad, right? When they get into open water, we talked about being able to troll up to 3.5 miles an hour with gizzard shad. If you're targeting alewives though, in open water, slower speeds tend to be better. 1.5 to 2, 2.5. Okay? Gizzard shads have a tendency when they're in open water to move a whole lot quicker. Alewives have a tendency to just kind of hang out and take their time. So depending on what kind of bait fish you're targeting, what the fish are eating, you may see days when fast is really good when they're eating shad, and the next day they may be on a school of alewives when you need to slow down and catch some fish. So the speed isn't always depending on what the walleyes is doing. Sometimes that speed, if you look back at our 8 steps, we talk about speed. One of the things we talk about speed is we talk about match the bait fish in the area. That's part of it. Okay? All right. I know lots of stuff to cover, guys. I know it's a ton of information thrown at you. I know somebody said the other day after the seminar he's like drinking water from a fire hose. That's good. I want to throw a whole bunch of stuff at you. You're going to get some of it. You're not. That's why we make the DVDs available. You can go back and you can study it, and you can kind of take your time, take your notes, and slow down where you need to slow down and watch certain pieces over and over again. All right. Almost done. Ciscoes and whitefish. Remember we talked about where we started in the spring with the earliest spawning baitfish. Now we're ending with one of the few fall spawning baitfish. Ciscoes will spawn from October to mid-December when waters get down around 40 degrees. Walleyes will focus on Cisco in the early spring and fall when the surface temperature is below 70. When conditions are right, Ciscoes, just like Smelt, will rise up in the warmer water column, eat plankton. Walleyes take advantage of this. Ciscoes change what they do once surface temperature exceeds 60. So let's talk about this real fast. Ciscoes and whitefish, fall spawners, 40 to 30 degrees. They spawn rock, gravel, sand bottoms, usually in really shallow water, 6, 8, 10 feet at the most. They eat plankton, insects, small crustaceans. They prefer waters in the mid-50 range and cannot tolerate water over 75. So once it gets warm, the shallow water bite for Ciscoes is done. They're often found below the thermocline during the day, and just like Smelt, they'll come to the surface at night to eat bugs. So we have to kind of concentrate on how we're going to catch fish in the summertime if they're on Ciscoes and whitefish. Very few spring patterns for walleye feeding on Ciscoes happen because springtime, walleyes are up shallow. They're trying to spawn. Ciscoes are usually in deeper, colder water. They don't really interact. Summertime, as Ciscoes move towards the surface in the evening, walleyes will follow them and feed heavily. Open water trolling early to mid-evening over the deepest water can be productive. Long minnow baits work best. This is kind of neat. There's a lot of guys I've talked to who've gone to Canada. You hear lots of stories Guys go to Canada, they're catching a bunch of pike, a bunch of small walleye. All of a sudden, they're heading back at sunset back to the cabin. And they got a little 14-foot boat and a 15-horse mower, and they're driving back, and a guy puts on a Rapala, and he throws her out behind the boat just to kind of drive back to the cabin. He's got his feet up, and all of a sudden, he's over 190 feet of water. All of a sudden, his rod goes whop, and he reels in a big giant walleye. And he's been catching walleyes this big all day, and all of a sudden, he catches this big giant walleye with a lure that's 5 feet down over 180 feet of water. This is what's happened. Those Cisco's have come up from the cooler water at night. The bugs are starting to come up to the surface and hatch. Cisco's come up. All of a sudden, the big walleyes come up and chase those Cisco's. You don't even, and you call it an accident, right? Yeah, we caught one by accident. Well, you never catch a fish by accident. There's a reason that fish is there, right? So you might want to turn back around again and try to catch another one. You've got a short little window at night, but this is why that's happening. If you ever had that happen to you, this is why it's happening. All right, fall patterns are important, right? Shallow spawning grounds are pillaged by walleye in the evening, where casting and trolling big minnow baits can produce some of the biggest fish. Listen to this one I'm going to tell you here, guys. During the day, Cisco's will move horizontally out over deep water, often, actually most times, suspended at the same depth as the shallow water they're using to spawn. I've been doing this for 20 years, and we say things over and over and over and over again, and it just doesn't always stick. This is why we go back and we redo these things every single year. We do some of these seminars that aren't fun, they're not sexy, they're not fishing, but you have to understand it. So we talked about knowing how deep the deep weed edge is, because that's where fish are going to move. That's the depth they're going to use right when they move off the weeds. Exactly the same for Cisco's. They're going to move up to shallow rock flats or shallow rock humps, 8-9 feet of water to spawn at night. As soon as they're done, they're going to move right out over 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, Higgins Lake, where they got a lot of Cisco's, 120 feet. That's only 50 yards from where they spawn. They're going to be at the same exact depth that they spawned at. It's a whole lot easier for fish to move horizontally than it is to move vertically up and down the water column. So they'll go in, spawn at 8, move out during the day, but they're going to stay at basically the same depth they're going to spawn at. So when they move back in at night, they just simply swim horizontally, don't have to go vertically. That's a huge piece of understanding how bait fish move when they come off of shallow water out into deep water to suspend. Cisco's are notorious for that. Okay? Long, thin crankbaits are the best. Number 13, number 18, Rapalas, big ripsticks, the big thunder stick, big deep thunder sticks, big tail dancers, all those bigger baits that are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, even small musky baits, 8, 9, 10-inch baits, catch a lot of walleye this time of year. If you're going to troll for them in the daytime, off their spawning grounds, big willow leaf blades, size 6, size 8. Again, I wouldn't be against taking a musky style spinner, maybe taking it off and putting a crawler harness behind it if you want to do that. And then if you're going to fish with spoons, the biggest spoons you can get. I like silver base, but I really like any of these bait fish like this. I like white based spoons, especially as water gets cold. My favorite way to catch these fish though is long skinny minnow baits. One of my bucket lists, you think of a bucket list, you go, man, I want to go a long way away. One of my bucket lists for the next year is to get up to Higgins Lake, where there's huge pike, 20, 24, 25, 28 pound pike that nobody touches, and big giant lake trout and splake that nobody catches during the summertime, that move up in the fall to feed on these Cisco's and whitefish. There's actually a little remnant population of walleyes that have come through from Houghton Lake into Higgins that guys catch once in a while by accident. I can't wait to get up there. I'm going to try to get there this fall and take advantage of the fall Cisco bite, because I know exactly where those Cisco's spawn. I think we can catch a lot of these big pike, big lake trout, big splake, and big walleyes by taking advantage of this. We're going to look at doing that next year, one of our bucket list things. Okay? All right, so that's kind of a whole deal here. That's kind of the whole forage. So it's real quick, right? Smelt in the river system early. About the time walleye finish spawning, bullheads are spawning in the marshes and shallow flats. Walleyes eat perch throughout the year, but they really take advantage of the spawn when the perch are in shallow water in the weeds. Minnows start to come in about the same time or just after the perch do. We're talking about shiners. Walleyes, we know in Saginaw Bay and Lake Erie, eat a lot of shiners, so take advantage of where that is. If you fish a natural lake, take advantage of the suspension of bluegills and crappies. Smaller ones in the weeds, bigger ones out away from the deep weed edge and open water. Take advantage of that. Alewives will start to show up in late summer, or late spring, early summer, middle of the 60s. They'll stay shallow most of the time, and they'll move out into really, really deep water. Gizzard Shad come in next. They spawn in rotted timber, flooded timber, 1 to 10 feet of water. They have a tendency to, again, stay shallow. Remember, those Gizzard Shad and those alewives and those shiners are plankton feeders, very, very high in the water column, especially when it's hot, flat, and calm. Summertime, walleyes focus mostly on young of the year, perch, Gizzard Shad, and alewives. And then finally, at the end of the season, in the fall time, if you have ciscles or whitefish, look for shallow gravel spots that fish will spawn at night, and they'll move off at the same depth in the deeper water during the day. Guys, understand what your fish that you're fishing for is eating. I can't stress. I don't care if you know nothing about walleye, nothing about bass, nothing about pike. I don't care. Spend your time, if you're going to spend a little bit of time learning about fish, learn about bait fish. Learn about the bait fish that are in your lake. You can get that from the DNR and netting surveys. Understand the type of bait fish in your lake, where it lives at certain times of year, how it acts to what it has to eat. And I guarantee you, I promise you, if you start concentrating on where the bait fish are and start fishing there, you're going to catch fish by accident and be able to start putting a pattern together. Okay? Thanks again for your time. Again, I know this foundation series is not exciting. We're not talking about lures and fancy colors and all kinds of cool things. We'll get into that as we go through the season here. But this foundation series is exactly what it says, guys. We're laying a foundation of knowledge so you can catch more fish every time you're on the water. So when you start to look at what bait do I need to use, what color do I need to use, how big does it need to be, you actually have a reason for picking that size, shape, style of bait, why you're fishing it, where you're fishing it, what size, what speed. Thanks for coming out, guys. Appreciate it. We'll see you soon.